Morning. Going to depart from the regular devotional that I'm working through for this week to address a few comments and challenges to us in light of the disturbing images and events that we are seeing and are taking place within the state, especially within Minneapolis and St. Paul, and also throughout the country. In response to the very apparent abuse of power of some police, one for sure in specific, and others in support of them, over the death of this young black man in Minneapolis. I don't do this very often. I don't feel I have either the skill or the platform to really make a huge effect, but for the body of Communion Life Fellowship, I do believe it'd be important for us to have some thoughts to consider in all that's going on right now. We're seeing images that, of course, how this fortunate man was killed, and also of the looting and burning and the anger and the violence in response to that in Minnesota and throughout the United States and some of the major cities. And so you have two contrasting images of violence, both rooted in the sin nature of humanity, which is something that we can all identify with, if not in action, in having hearts that are completely fallen in sin. Psalm 14, verse 2 and 3 reads like this: "The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man, to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. All have turned aside, together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one." Talking about the fallen nature of mankind, I believe, of which each and every one of us is very much under, in the sense of being slaves of sin and death, prior to being set free by the gospel. But the nature of the heart still affects us, and we see that in our own anger and frustrations and arguments and quarrels that we ourselves get into on a regular basis. But as we see these two different expressions of sinful nature, whether it's the abuse of power or whether it's a looting and burning and criminal activity, we can be affected by both of them, but our biases in who we are will be predisposed to see one more wrong probably than the other, if not more wrong than the other, at least one that would disturb us more in some ways than the other. It breaks down, I think, in what we're seeing now in some general terms, the systemic racism that's in our country. And there's also systemic criminal activity in the hearts of men. There's also personal racism, and there's personal acts of crime in our lives. And we respond differently to the systemic and the personal. I want to give kind of an example and use my own life for that. We were missionaries in the Philippines. And in the Philippines, we were a minority in the areas that we lived and stuff, in the sense of skin color. We were very much a minority. And yet, we did not experience systemic racism being a minority in that area, because we, and let me use myself because I'm a white male, a white American male, I was free of a systemic racism within the culture I lived in. I did experience personal racism, so there were those and single events in life, and numerous ones of them where personally, because I was of a different skin color in the area I lived, there was a reaction and a rejection and a different treatment of who I am because of that. And so I had the personal, but to confuse the personal with the systemic, because the difference is I could be frustrated or angered by a personal act of racism against me. I did not struggle with a systemic problem of racism in my life, in my worldview and my cultural view around me, in if you will, in my sense of my self-image as a person. Because even though there was the personal racism, there was not a systemic racism. So when I see acts like happened with police and stuff, I am not able to judge them from an experiential understanding of systemic racism. And so I can look at them from a personal one and say, oh, I can understand how that is wrong towards that man. But I will not be able to understand the depth of emotion and anger from somebody who is in a systemic racism, born into that because of their skin color. Even though it's possible that personally they've not experienced as much. They still have to have grown up in this system of racism that's within the country. So that's one of the examples in the issue of the racism and what's going on between systemic and personal. On the other hand, in criminal activity, it's a similar thing in my life. I have experienced personal crime against me. I've had my garage broken into and things stolen out of it. And I've had different acts of vandalism done on my properties and here and there and that. But I've never lived in a systemic system of crime. And an example of that would be obviously I've never grown up in a family of organized crime, so I don't understand that at all, although I know it exists. And also I've never lived in a neighborhood that was controlled by violent gangs. There may be acts of violence done by gangs in the neighborhoods that I've lived in, but not something that overshadowed my life a whole bunch. Proper diligence, due diligence in watching what's going on around me and where I am and what time of day, and it was enough. I have felt pretty secure my whole life. So I've experienced personal crime, but not systemic crime. I think what we're seeing in Minneapolis has some acts of personal crime, obviously many acts, but there's also a systemic crime. In other words, there is those within our population who just are criminals in their heart actions and outward actions. And some of those are obviously the ones out there doing the looting and stuff and just taking advantage, not so much protesting an act of violence, racial violence by a police officer against a black man, but taking advantage of the anger and the systemic anger and systemic racism by looting and doing whatever kind of violence can be done. All of it is sin, but we are not all affected by it the same way. And as a result, we can come up with different predisposed judgments to what we see. We can be angered by seeing a man who has been killed by abuse of power. And we can be angered by seeing stores being looted and buildings burned and destroyed And depending upon our own inner bias, one of those will weigh more in our forefront of our consciousness than the other. And so that's the nature of sin. As Scripture has said, all of us are fallen. No one seeks God. Now, some might say, well, what does this have to do with God? These are actions. But it does. Ultimately, everything that we do in our lives relates back to how we are in relationship to our Creator and to the Lord God, who made heaven and earth and created us for His own purposes, that we might honor and glorify Him and worship Him. And so when it says that the Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God, it says they have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. That's me, that's you, that's everyone you see. We are not all corrupt in action in the same degree, but in the heart that doesn't seek God naturally without the movement of God in our lives to draw us to Him. But for those of us who have committed our lives to Jesus Christ in the church, there is some advice in some scriptures that we can do to deal with our lives. Now, we still struggle with these biases in our hearts. So many, sometimes they're unconscious, sometimes it's conscious, but we just choose to ignore them. But in Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24, David says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. See if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." This is a prayer, especially in times like this, we need to be praying. We need to be aware of our own bias. And the only way that we can do that is if we ask the Spirit of God to search out our heart and reveal it to us, because we are very good at self-justification and excusing ourselves. We're very good at pointing at a sin that is horrendous in our eyes, but somebody else's sin, and being very lenient with our own sin because of our own biases. We also need to engage wickedness of any kind that we encounter in our days, in our lives. First of all, wickedness in our own lives, our personal wickedness and personal sin. Our propensity to be angry with the ones we loved around us, and to be short-tempered, and to be caustic in word and deed, and to inflict hurt if we can, or manipulate or dominate, or any manner of sin. There are so many different ways. It'd be foolish to even try and name them all. But we all have personal areas that we need, that have wickedness in our lives, that we need to root out and ruthlessly deal with. As the Gospels say, if your right eye causes you to stumble, tear it out and throw it. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away from you. A ruthlessness in dealing with the wickedness of our heart. Not mutilating our bodies, but dealing with sin ruthlessly and getting rid of it. And ordering our ways after God diligently to serve Him in righteousness and love. And secondly, in the culture around us. And this means not turning a blind eye. This means not necessarily engaging in every area that needs to be corrected, because there are so many that we would be thinned out and wouldn't be able to get anything. So some people are very passionate about the murder of abortion of babies, and are committed, like the Pregnancy Resource Center, to deliver women through education and through love and presenting of the gospel, from either from committing such an act or from being healed and forgiven if they have fallen into it. And not all of us will be active with what would be called in military terms boots on the ground. But it doesn't mean that we need to be apathetic towards it either. There's prayer and financial support and having a clear conviction of how we feel about it in right and wrong, and being free and speaking that in love and truth. All of us may not become aggressively active in trying to bring equality to all areas of life. But we all need to be active in the support of that and the living it out when it is encountered in the areas that around our life do it. Life is so varied with so many things. There will be areas where some will be active, but all of us should be engaged and concerned in some way with wickedness as it goes on around us. And then thirdly, we need to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. Because ultimately, laws and the use of even proper governmental force will never change the hearts of men. There have been many laws on the books, and are many laws on the books against crimes of looting and thieving and stealing, and crimes of racism and prejudice, and all manners of different ways of oppression and abusing of people. And there's been enforcement of those laws, and yet the hearts of men have not been changed. They're good to moderate the behavior of men so that we have a somewhat civil society to live in without total anarchy. But only the good news of Jesus Christ, only the lordship of Christ in our lives will change the heart. And even then, you and I who know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior still have many areas of struggle with our own blindness, with our own biasness in our heart. Whereas Psalm 139 can come really good into play and tell us, Holy Spirit, search out my heart. Let me know if there's any wicked way in me. And help me, Father, to walk in righteousness and love. So those are just some thoughts on what's going on now as you engage with people to whatever degree. Be aware of our own biases, our own prejudices, and submit ourselves to the work of Holy Spirit to help overcome those. Help be able to, through the proclamation of Jesus Christ in life and word, bring healing to the nation and to our city. And we'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye.